All right, we're ready for part 3 of the TBM switch panel build process. So if you remember, in part 1 we built the case, assembled the switches into the panel. Part 2 we did some initial wiring of the Arduino shield. And part 3 we're going to go ahead and get started on connecting the rat's nest to the switch panel itself. So one of the things I'll mention, I actually built myself a little jig here because it makes it so much easier to kind of hold stuff. You know, one less thing you have to hold. This doesn't come as part of the kit. I can probably sell it as a separate part if people want it or find use for it. I found it invaluable, so I've got that I'm using. But I've got my shield here mounted up. You'll notice that the pin sides are up because, again, using our reference Arduino board, we want to make sure that this is going to plug in this way when we're all said and done. The Ethernet or the USB port's going to come out this side, which is where the ELT switch is. So that's on the right side. So we just want to make sure that this the shield is in the right position. So it's facing the right position, facing the right way, and we've got our nice cable bundles here that we talked about earlier. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and turn this thing around. I'll explain kind of what I'm doing as I go. You may not be able to very easily see everything I'm doing, but hopefully you'll get the gist of what needs to happen. So again, this is your best friend in this process. And so, you know, we've talked about the color coding and getting them into the right pinholes on the Arduino shield. Now what we're going to do is we're going to start to really map those to the switches themselves. So if we start by looking at number D2, so D2 is a red wire, so we're going to look for the red wire D2 coming out the whichever side we think is appropriate, which I guess is this side. And that D2 is supposed to be for the switch 1, which is the landing light in the down position. And so we're going to find that switch pin and we'll attach to it. So on this guy, in this orientation, this is the switch right here that controls the landing gear. Now one thing to remember on the three-way switches in particular, the action is opposite of the pin. And what I mean by that is when the switch is in the down position or the off position, which in this case is this direction, the pin that's actually active is the top pin on the switch. When I push the switch up into what would be the landing light position in this case, the pin that's actually active is this pin on the bottom of the switch. So you got to keep that in mind. So when you're hooking things up, you get them hooked up in the right direction. Okay, so with that, I got my soldering iron here all warmed up, 400 degrees or so. I got my solder. Let's go ahead and get to work. So again, we're looking for wire number 2. Here it is. Well, and before I do that, I guess I'll talk a little bit about it. Depending on how organized you are, let me see if I can put this around this way, right? So on this side, we're gonna wire. Here we go. We're gonna wire all the way from the landing light switch down to and including these 2 push button switches here. On the top and on the bottom side, then we'll do the ECS panel, and we'll do this all the way over to here. So what I find easiest to do is start from the closest to where my wires are coming out and work my way out. You could also start here and work your way in. It doesn't really matter. It's really kind of a personal preference. So with that said, I'm going to start with the closest one in to my bundle. And I apologize because I'm going to have to work reverse to the camera, but I'm going to start with the 2 push buttons. So if I look at the push buttons, these are the main generator reset and the standby generator reset. The farthest one over is the standby, and that is going to be D11. So I'm going to look for my 11, and it's going to be a black cable. And since that's a momentary switch, we only have 1 terminal to put it on. So I'm going to find my black cable here that's got 11 on it, hopefully. I found a missing label that came off earlier, so I'm going to be curious as to where that came from. Alright, here's my black 11 cable. Looks like I need to attach the shield a little bit better here. It's flopping around. You can also use zip ties or tape, whatever works best. So let me find my 11 again. And I like to kind of get it out of the bundle a little bit. Double check it's number 11, and then I'm just going to give it a little bit of a loop in here. I mean, stuff doesn't have to be pulled taut. Sometimes it's better to leave yourself a little extra. So if you can see here now, what I've done here is I've got 11, it's just kind of looping around, and it's going to attach to this farthest switch. So we'll leave a little slack just in case we ever have to replace the switch. Double check we're 11, black 11. And I'll go ahead and use the stripping tool. Strip off a little there, and I'll see if I can. We'll go in the empty hole there. So I give it just a little bit of bend to kind of keep the. If you can see it, kind of keep the wire from getting away from me when I'm soldering. And we'll get the old solder iron out, and then we'll give it a little heat, a little solder. Now, one thing to keep in mind is these switches, they will very easily melt. You can use a heat sink on it, but then when you put the heat sink and it's this close, it just doesn't work out very well. So, you know, I found using a fairly hot iron, again, I use 400 degrees thereabouts. It's fast enough that it heats everything up to melt quick enough, but it doesn't melt the switch as long as you only stay there for just as long as it takes. Now, soldering is kind of an art, not necessarily a science, so you have to kind of just play with it until you get it right, just long enough to heat and melt everything up, but not melt the actual switch. So there we go. So we got the first push button in there, and we'll just move on. We're working our way backwards, right? So we did the standby generator reset. Now we're doing the main generator reset. That's a red D10. Find my red D10. So we'll pull them all out of the bundle, and again, I just put a little loop in them. In the end, once we're all said and done, I'll come back with zip ties and kind of tie everything up into a nice, tidy bundle. We've got 10. Again, just to show you, I won't show you each and every one as we go, but now we've got the second switch in. As we move our way backwards, I've just got a little hook in that wire. Then put a little solder on it. So I'm going to go through the rest of these. I'll just kind of solder along. I'll probably speed the video up so people can kind of see as I go, but really I'm just going to do that for all the rest of the wires around the way. And again, it's the same process. Pick your switch, determine which wire, what color it is, and what label it should be. Solder it up. Hope for the best. Okay, there you have it. We've got everything wired up, all of the switches and whatnot, so we're going to go ahead and remove our little strap here for the shield. We'll slide the panel out. Look at that. All right, that's kind of what it looks like. So we'll go ahead and clean up the wires a little bit. I like to just kind of wire mine things together so that they look nice and neat. Alright, and there you have it. We've got a fairly nicely wrapped thing. This thing should have a little bit of play in it. The shield should have a little bit of play because you gotta get it in the box, and the box is a bit angled, so you want to make sure that that isn't completely tied down. Should be able to move a little bit. I just go through and kind of make sure that I don't have any wires that are close to touching, somehow shorting or anything like that. Just make sure that things are kind of laid out nicely. All right. Now, one of the telltale signs, if you've been soldering and you melt one of the switches, is that the switch will feel real loose. So before I go and do much of anything, I just kind of feel the switches and make sure I don't have one that feels like it has melted. Okay, so then the final step of this is to just take the Arduino board and plug it on the shield. Like that. Make sure all the pins are in. Make sure it's seated down nicely on everything. And there you go. Finished panel. So the final part is I'll put a test program on here, which allows me to run a test of all the switches and make sure things are working, and we'll put it together with the case and call it good. So now that I've tested the panel, I tested all the switches and the lights, they all work. The last step is to actually load the ArduSymX firmware and try it out in the air.